They thought this would break you by now, not just disappoint you, not just slow you down, but completely shut you down. Because what you've been feeling lately isn't normal pressure. It's heavier than that. It's like life itself has been pushing against you in ways you can't explain. Every time you try to move forward, something blocks you. Every time you find clarity, confusion returns. Every time you rebuild yourself, something shakes the ground again. And the strange part? No one else seems to understand it. But you feel it. That silent resistance, that invisible weight, that constant sense that something is working behind the scenes to drain your strength, your focus, your peace. You wake up tired for no clear reason. You try to stay strong, but your energy keeps getting pulled in every direction. Even your thoughts don't feel fully yours sometimes. And you start asking yourself, why is everything harder than it should be? But listen carefully. What if this was never random? What if the pressure wasn't designed to stop you, but to expose something inside you that refuses to quit? Because if you're still here, still thinking, still holding on despite everything that tried to silence you, then the real question becomes, what if it was never meant to finish you? The awakening of the chosen one. Something started changing inside you before you even had words for it. At first it felt subtle, almost invisible. You couldn't explain it, but your perception of life became sharper. Things you used to ignore suddenly started feeling heavier. People's energy felt different. Conversations didn't sit the same way anymore. Even silence started speaking louder. It wasn't just growth. It felt like awakening. And with it came something unexpected, emotional sensitivity. You started noticing patterns others don't see. The same cycles repeating in your life. The same doors opening and closing at strange timing. The same feeling that you're always almost there, but never fully settled. And then came the isolation. People didn't necessarily leave you all at once, but something changed. You started pulling back, not because you hated anyone, but because your inner world no longer matched the outer one. It felt like you were walking through life slightly out of sync with everything around you. That's when confusion began. Because nothing made logical sense anymore. You were trying harder than ever, yet facing more resistance than ever. You were improving yourself, yet feeling more pressure than before. You were seeking peace, yet experiencing more inner noise. And you started asking silent questions like, why is this happening to me? Did I do something wrong? Why does life feel different now? But deep down, another realization was forming. This wasn't random. Because every step forward seemed to trigger something pushing back. Every moment of clarity was followed by distortion. Every emotional breakthrough was followed by a wave of heaviness. It's like something didn't want you to fully recognize what you're becoming. But here's what makes this stage so important. Awakening always creates resistance. Because the moment you start seeing differently, you stop fitting into the old version of your life. And that's why everything feels unstable right now. Not because you're losing your mind, not because you're broken, but because your awareness is expanding faster than your environment can keep up with. And even though it feels confusing, even painful at times, there's one undeniable truth underneath it all. You are not going backwards. You are not imagining the shifts. You are becoming aware of a version of yourself that cannot return to ignorance. And that is exactly why everything feels like it's reacting to you. Because the awakening didn't just start happening around you. It started happening inside you. The invisible pressure you felt. There's a kind of pressure you can't point to, but you can feel it everywhere. It's not always a big disaster. It's the small things that never seem to align. Plans that almost work out, then suddenly fall apart. Opportunities that appear, then quietly disappear. Conversations that feel slightly off. Timing that never feels fully on your side. And over time, it builds something inside you. Emotional exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from one event, but the kind that accumulates silently. Like you're constantly pushing forward in a world that keeps adding invisible weight to your steps. You try to rest, but your mind doesn't fully rest. You try to move forward, but something always delays you. You try to stay hopeful, but repeated resistance starts shaping your expectations. And that's when the feeling becomes deeper than frustration. It starts feeling like life itself is against you. Not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, draining way. like you're always slightly out of alignment with things that are supposed to be simple. You notice patterns. Why do things only get complicated when you try to improve? Why do solutions appear but never fully stay? Why does peace feel temporary but pressure feels constant? And the hardest part is this: no one else sees it. To the outside world, everything looks normal. But inside your experience, it feels like you're carrying something invisible, something that doesn't announce itself, but never fully leaves. That's why it feels isolating, because you can't easily explain why you're tired. You can't easily justify why simple things feel heavy. You can't easily describe why your energy feels drained, even when nothing major has happened. But what you're sensing is not random chaos. It's a pattern of resistance that shows up right when you try to rise. Almost like every step upward triggers something that tries to slow you down. And over time, you start to realize something important. This pressure doesn't always come to destroy you loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, consistently, until you begin questioning your own strength. But even in that space, something inside you refuses to fully give up. And that quiet refusal is exactly what proves you're still moving forward, even when everything feels like it's pushing back. The mind war, fear, doubt, and control. At some point, the real battle stops feeling external and starts happening inside your mind, because the pressure you've been feeling outside slowly finds its way inward. It doesn't always show up as events anymore. It shows up as thoughts. Repeating thoughts. Heavy thoughts. Thoughts that don't feel like they belong to your higher self, but they still echo loudly enough to affect your peace. That's where the mind war begins. You start overthinking everything. Every decision feels heavier than it should. Every step forward comes with second guessing. Even simple choices start feeling like they carry consequences too big to fully understand. And then the voice of fear becomes louder. Not always dramatic, sometimes subtle. You're not ready. You can't make it. You've tried before and nothing changed. What if this is all you're capable of? And the more exhausted you become, the harder it is to silence it. Because mental exhaustion changes how you perceive everything. Motivation doesn't just disappear, it gets buried under constant internal noise. Clarity doesn't just vanish, it gets clouded by doubt, repetition, and emotional fatigue. You start feeling disconnected from your own strength. Things that used to inspire you now feel distant. Goals that once felt exciting now feel unreachable. Even hope starts to feel like something you have to force instead of something you naturally feel. And that's the most dangerous part of the mind war. It doesn't need to defeat you directly. It just needs to keep you questioning yourself long enough to slow you down. But here's what's important to understand in this stage. Not every thought you think is truth. Not every fear you feel is reality. And not every moment of doubt is a sign of failure. Because what's happening here is not just psychological confusion, it's pressure targeting your focus, trying to redirect your energy inward instead of forward. Still, even in the middle of that mental noise, there's a part of you that notices something. You're still here, still thinking, still trying to make sense of it all. And that small resistance against the mental collapse is proof that the mind war hasn't fully taken you. It's only trying to convince you that it has. Divine intervention, the stop signal. There's a point in your journey where something strange starts happening. Things begin to not go as far as they were supposed to, not in a visible, dramatic way, but in quiet, almost unexplainable moments. Situations that should have collapsed completely suddenly stall. Problems that looked like they were about to explode suddenly lose momentum. Paths that looked open suddenly get blocked at the last second. And at first, it feels frustrating. You think, why now? Why is this happening again? Why does it always stop right when I think I'm finally moving forward? But later, if you look closely at your story, you start noticing something deeper. There were moments where things could have gone much worse. A decision you almost made, but didn't. A situation that almost spiraled, but somehow didn't reach its worst point. A connection that almost pulled you into something harmful, but faded away. A timing delay that felt annoying, but later revealed itself as protection. And slowly, a different perspective begins to form. What if those delays weren't punishments? What if the closed doors weren't rejections? What if the interruptions weren't setbacks, but stop signals? Because not every no in your life was against you. Some of them were quietly for you. There were moments you didn't understand in real time, moments that felt like abandonment, silence, or confusion. But looking back, you realize something important. If things had continued the way they were going, you might have been pulled into situations that would have drained you even more deeply. And yet, something stopped it. Not always in a way you could explain, not always in a way you could control, but in a way that redirected your path without destroying you in the process. That's why this stage is so important, because it challenges one of your deepest fears. Maybe I was alone in all of this, but the pattern tells a different story. Because even in your lowest moments, there were interruptions that protected your direction. Even in confusion, there were delays that saved your energy. Even in frustration, there were closures that prevented deeper damage. And when you step back far enough, you start to see it differently. Not everything that stopped you was against you. Some things were stopped for you. And the most powerful realization in this stage is this: you were never left unguarded in the middle of what you went through. Even when it felt like everything was falling apart, something was still holding certain things back from falling too far. Why pressure intensifies before breakthrough. There's a strange pattern most people don't recognize while they're inside it. Right before something finally changes in your life, everything seems to get worse. Not better, not easier, worse. The pressure increases, the confusion deepens. The emotional weight feels heavier than before. And just when you think you've reached your limit, something else adds itself on top. It feels unfair at first, because you start thinking, I've already been through enough. Why is it still getting harder? But what you don't realize in that moment is something critical about transformation. Pressure often intensifies right before a breakthrough. Not because you're being punished, but because something in you is being pushed to the surface. There is a stage where everything familiar starts to break down. Motivation drops, emotional stability fluctuates, confidence feels unstable, even your sense of direction becomes unclear. It feels like you're losing your footing, like the ground you were standing on is no longer stable. But that instability is not random. It's the collapse of an old structure inside you, because you cannot step into a new version of your life while still holding the full weight of the old one. So what happens instead is pressure builds. Old patterns become uncomfortable. Old cycles stop feeling sustainable. Old ways of thinking start to feel heavy and repetitive, and internally, it creates emotional tension. You may experience breakdown moments, times where you feel overwhelmed for no clear reason, times where you question everything, times where you feel like you are stuck in a loop with no visible exit. But those moments are not signs of failure. They are signs of friction. And friction always appears when something is shifting direction. This is why confusion often peaks right before clarity arrives, because the mind tries to hold on to what is familiar, even when something new is forming underneath it. That tension creates noise, doubt, and emotional resistance. But underneath that noise, change is already happening. Think of it like pressure building before a release. The tighter it gets, the closer the shift becomes. And even though it feels like you're being pushed backward, what's actually happening is far more important. You are being pushed beyond the limits of your old identity. That's why nothing feels stable in this phase. Not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your direction. Everything feels like it's in motion because something inside you is preparing to break through the surface. And here is the hidden truth in this stage. If it truly wasn't meant for you to move forward, you wouldn't feel this level of resistance. Because resistance doesn't usually appear where nothing is changing. It appears right where transformation is already in progress. So even in the moments when it feels like everything is falling apart, it may actually be the final pressure before everything starts to shift into place. The breakthrough moment. Everything shifts. And then it happens. Not always in a dramatic explosion. Not always with noise or outside confirmation, but in a quiet internal moment where something inside you finally gives way. It feels like a shift. A real one. The kind you can't fake and you can't reverse. Because after everything you've been through, The pressure, the confusion, the mental war, the emotional exhaustion, there comes a point where your system simply cannot hold the same tension anymore. And instead of breaking you, something releases. Suddenly, clarity starts to return. Not all at once, but enough for you to breathe differently. Enough for your mind to stop looping the same fears. Enough for you to see patterns that were always there, but hidden behind emotional noise. And you start noticing something powerful. None of this was random. The delays, the resistance, the confusion, the emotional highs and lows, they all had a pattern. And for the first time, you are not inside the storm. You are observing it. That's the beginning of the breakthrough, because awareness changes everything. The fear that once controlled your thoughts starts losing its grip, not because the fear disappears instantly, but because you no longer fully believe it the same way you used to. It becomes noise instead of truth. And that shift alone changes your entire internal world. You start feeling lighter in moments where you used to feel overwhelmed. You begin questioning the heaviness instead of accepting it. You stop assuming every obstacle means stop, and start recognizing that some of them were simply part of movement, not limitation. And then comes the emotional release, the moment where everything you were holding inside starts to loosen. It may come as silence, or reflection, or even tears you didn't expect. Not tears of defeat, but release. Like something inside you finally stopped resisting what it was carrying for too long. And in that release, something new begins to form. Your identity starts to shift. The version of you that was defined by confusion, pressure, and survival mode starts to dissolve. Not instantly, but gradually. Like an old layer peeling away, revealing a more stable presence underneath. You don't feel like the same person reacting to life anymore. You start feeling like someone who is seeing life differently. And that is the real breakthrough. Not that everything around you suddenly changed, but that you did. Fear no longer sits in the driver's seat. Confusion no longer defines your direction. And even though challenges may still exist, they no longer control your internal state the way they used to. This is where the shift becomes undeniable. Because once you see through what was happening, you can never fully unsee it again. And in that realization, something settles inside you. You didn't survive all of that just to stay the same. You went through it because something inside you was being rewritten all along. Identity reveal who you really are. After the breakthrough, something subtle begins to change. It's not just how you think, it's how you see yourself. Because once the noise inside you starts to fade, a deeper truth starts rising to the surface. A truth that was always there, but hidden under pressure, confusion, and survival mode. You begin to realize you were never as lost as you felt. You were just overwhelmed by what you were going through. And now, without all that internal chaos constantly pulling at your attention, something stronger begins to emerge. Clarity. Not the kind of clarity that comes from outside validation, but the kind that comes from finally hearing yourself again. Your intuition becomes sharper. You start noticing things earlier, reading situations more accurately, feeling when something is right or when it's not, without needing long explanations. It's not guesswork anymore. It's awareness, and with that awareness comes something new. Stability. Because where confusion used to dominate your reactions, now there is space. Space to think, space to observe, space to respond instead of react. You start realizing that you are not as fragile as the past made you believe. You have survived emotional pressure that should have broken your focus. You have carried uncertainty without completely losing yourself in it. You have endured mental battles that tried to convince you that you were stuck, but you kept moving anyway, even if slowly. And that changes how you view yourself. Resilience is no longer just an idea, it becomes your evidence. There is also a new kind of calm that begins to show up. Not because life is suddenly perfect, but because your internal world is no longer constantly collapsing under every challenge. You are no longer reacting to everything as if it defines your entire future. You are learning to stand still inside the storm. And that is a different level of strength. At this stage, you also begin to understand something deeper. The events you went through were not random chaos. They were shaping something in you that could not be formed through comfort alone. And this is where the identity shift becomes undeniable. You are no longer only the person who struggled. You are becoming the person who understands what the struggle was building. And slowly, a realization settles in your spirit. You were never random in this story. Every delay, every pressure, every moment of confusion that made you question yourself, it all played a role in bringing you here. Not to destroy you, but to refine how you see yourself. And now, as your perception shifts, you stop asking only, "Why did this happen to me?" And you start realizing something deeper. It was happening through me, to shape who I was becoming. What you must do now, guidance phase. Now that your awareness has shifted, the most important part begins, how you live with this new understanding. Because insight without direction can easily turn into confusion again if you return to the same mental environment that created the pressure in the first place. So this stage is about grounding yourself. Not in fear, not in overthinking, but in stability. First, you have to understand something clearly. You cannot keep feeding the same mental patterns that created exhaustion and expect peace to stay. That means becoming more intentional about what you allow into your mind. Stop engaging with fear-driven thoughts as if they are instructions. Not every thought deserves your attention. Some thoughts are just echoes of old pressure trying to regain control. You don't fight them, you disengage from them. Next, reduce unnecessary mental noise. If something consistently drains your energy, conversations, content, environments, habits, you need to step back from it. Not out of escape, but out of protection. Your energy is not unlimited, and after everything you've been through internally, you are rebuilding focus, not wasting it. Now shift toward alignment. Ask yourself more often, does this help me stay clear, or does it pull me back into confusion? That simple question will start guiding your decisions more than emotion ever could in this phase. And emotionally, you must prioritize stability, not intensity, not chaos, not constant stimulation, but calm consistency. Even small habits matter here. Moments of silence during your day, slowing down your reaction to stress, choosing reflection over immediate emotional response, creating space before making decisions. Because your system is no longer in survival mode, it is recalibrating. And recalibration requires peace, not pressure. You may still feel moments of doubt or emotional waves, but now you are learning not to amplify them. You observe them, acknowledge them, and let them pass instead of building entire stories around them. This is where your power becomes practical, not in fighting everything, but in choosing what deserves access to your attention. And slowly, as you apply this, something changes. Your mind becomes less reactive. Your energy becomes more stable. Your direction becomes clearer. And you start realizing that protection is not just something that happened in your past. It is something you now actively participate in through your choices. Because at this stage, the goal is not to chase intensity. The goal is to maintain alignment. And every time you choose clarity over confusion, peace over fear, and awareness over reaction, DBT danek des diada jitatas, you reinforce the new version of yourself that has already begun to emerge. Now that the internal storm is settling, something different begins to take shape. Not immediately loud, not instantly perfect, but steady and real. This is where life starts to feel like it is finally breathing with you, instead of pushing against you. You may not notice it all at once, but small signs begin to appear. Your mind feels less crowded. Your emotions become easier to understand. Situations that once overwhelmed you no longer take control of your entire inner state. It's not that challenges disappear, it's that they stop defining you. And that shift changes everything. Because when your inner world stabilizes, your outer world starts to respond differently too. Relationships feel clearer. You stop tolerating confusion in the same way you used to. You begin to recognize who brings peace into your life and who only amplifies noise. And without forcing it, your direction becomes more natural. You no longer feel like you are constantly chasing answers. Instead, clarity starts meeting you in moments of silence, reflection, and simple awareness. There is also something deeper happening underneath it all, emotional healing. Not the kind that erases everything overnight, but the kind that slowly rebuilds your trust in yourself. You stop reacting from old wounds. You stop assuming every setback means failure. You start giving yourself space to grow without judgment. And over time, something powerful becomes obvious. Life doesn't feel as heavy as it used to. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer carrying everything the same way. Even your past begins to change meaning. The moments that once felt confusing or painful start to look like preparation. You begin to understand that what you went through wasn't just disruption, it was development. And this realization brings a quiet strength, because it means nothing was wasted. Not the pressure, not the delays, not the confusion, not the internal battles. All of it contributed to shaping a version of you that is now more aware, more stable, and more grounded than before. And as you move forward from this point, life begins to open differently, not through force, but through alignment. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to chase it. You simply need to stay in the clarity you've gained. Because what comes next is not about returning to who you were before the struggle. It's about continuing forward as the version of you that the struggle revealed. And now, look at how far you've come in this story. From the silent pressure you couldn't explain, to the awakening that shifted your perception through the invisible resistance, the mental battles, the moments of confusion, and the times you felt like nothing was making sense. You didn't just experience struggle. You went through a transformation disguised as struggle, because every stage had a purpose, even the ones that felt unnecessary, unfair, or overwhelming. The delays that frustrated you were shaping your timing. The pressure that drained you was shaping your strength. The confusion that disturbed you was forcing you to look deeper than surface-level answers. And now, something is different. You see more clearly. You think,